from the beginning. Okay, so basically, just to give you a bit of background, I set up Apna Haq. It's an organisation based in Rotherham, South Yorkshire. I set it up 28 years ago. For the first probably 15 years, we supported women from our community around domestic violence. And then I won't go into the detail, but something happened where I was in a conversation with a younger woman who was about 20, 30 years younger than me. And when I said to her that child abuse happens within our communities, she said that it's made up and it's not true. And at that point, I shared with her that I was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And she then shared with me that she'd been abused by her grandfather from the ages of 7 till 12, and she'd never ever told anybody. So it was an evening get together we were having, and she spent the next 2 hours crying. And I decided as a professional, I thought I am a CEO of an organization that does support of women around Black domestic violence, but I don't talk about the issue, I suppose, where my passion comes from, about supporting people, which is child abuse. So I took a decision. So what we did as an organization is I did some staff training, I did some training for the board members, and since then we've become a voice, and I'm going to talk through some of the work that we've developed. I just want to say at the beginning that we're an anti-racist feminist organisation led by and for from our communities. We use the language, we've changed some of it, but the language has been about Black and minoritized communities. So in terms of our board members, we now have something like 44 different nationalities in Rotherham, and it wouldn't be possible to have everybody. But I've tried hard over the years to develop our board. So we've got a woman from the African community, a woman from the Sri Lankan community, a woman from the Roma community, somebody from the Yemeni community at the moment, and a number of Pakistani women background. Because for us as a community, as an organisation, some of the issues that have been raised here, we recognise that because we've been going for so long and we're better known, we've got that organisation, and most of our smaller communities, it will be many, many years before they have that resource. And we want to be able to reach out to those communities. Yeah. So in terms of so my background, as I said, is as a survivor. I also worked within the youth service 30 years ago, and then I moved into the voluntary sector, and I also have delivered lots and lots of training over the years. And I was really, really conscious that there was a gap in terms of child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation awareness. So again, Rotherham came on the roadmap of probably of the whole world in 2014 when the J report was released. And if you don't know, but the J report was about the sexual exploitation of girls happening within Rotherham. And what hit the headlines was that there were over 1,400 girls abused. What didn't get out into the headlines was that 10% of those girls were from the local communities, i.e. Pakistani backgrounds. Up until then, we're a secular organisation. We're not religious. I'd never spoken as a Muslim woman, but when I did about 30 different interviews talking about why, defending the position that as a community, we didn't know about the abuse and had we done, we would have done something. I then spoke out as a Muslim woman. And also there's been a number of other things that have happened. So it's really become important that we understand how racism works and the impact it has. So when I put this course together, which we call the 4’s, which is the heading is challenge, change, consolidate, and champion, because what we wanted to do is train up women within our local communities who became champions around child abuse. So we were funded through the Child Abuse Centre. They had some funding, and we were fortunate to get Professor Liz Kelly to come in and do an evaluation. We advertised the course and we had interest from across the UK. Eventually 14 people were recruited, 14 women, we targeted women. There were a whole range of different backgrounds. We had a woman who was a manager in a generic counselling service. We had a woman who was the lead safeguarding officer in a local authority. That's two examples. A number of the women were local community activists. And basically, all of them said is that the reason we want to do this course is because child abuse is not talked about, and we want to understand more so that we can talk about it. When this is an old presentation that I've lifted things from, but the course was delivered and evaluated. One of the things that was really, really important to me, and as I said, I come to this from a survivor's perspective, is to understand why those elements of shame and honor are. And a lot of that is to do because we don't talk about the issues, and it's victim blaming. And I know how difficult it can be to try and speak out as a survivor. So when I came across this theory U, which was in some of the training that I did, we developed this as part of the course that we delivered. And basically what theory you if you start from this end where it says downloading past patterns, that what we did is we used numerous case studies, and I'll go into a little bit detail about the case studies, because by getting people to look at real life case studies, and the case studies basically are saying, this could have been your mother, brother, sister, cousin, child in the family, somebody that you may have known has gone through this abuse. So it's about enabling them to look at what voice of judgment they're directing towards the abuse that's taken place, and enable them to see it with fresh eyes. So that then leads to a redirecting and developing a voice of compassion, which is about sensing from the field. And that is then enabling about letting go, which is the voice of fear. So because often, even just one example would be, as we were finishing this course, one of the BBC Look North wanted to come and do an interview, which I always talk openly about being a survivor. And one of the participants had agreed to speak. She then messaged me 2 days later and said, when I've spoken to my family, they're saying, how can you go on national TV and talk about child abuse? It's not going to be honourable, or it's going to be, and she said, I don't feel comfortable. As it happens, a couple of days later, she rang me back and said, look, I've thought about everything we covered in the course, and I am going to speak out, because if I don't do it after everything I've learned, I won't be doing a service. So just going back, so that the voice of fear and the letting go is about then putting all of these notions of shame and honor on the side, and then saying about who am I, who is myself, what is my work, and that's about I am going to speak out about injustice, which then goes on to the other bit, which is about sorry, I've gone that way. Let me see if I can go back here, which is about letting the new vision develop, and then it's about linking the head to the heart. So for me, any of the training that I'd gone around sexual abuse and child abuse always talks about the practical things. There's nothing to do with all of this deeper stuff that we need to go into to enable people to own what's going on and become champions. So, okay, this next slide. These are all the subjects, the areas that we covered on the course. And if you have a look at it, I'll just start from the top. It says about the lack of language, which has been covered today. The fact that child abuse, along with sexuality, is one of the taboo subjects, alcohol, the stuff around the victim blaming, the male excusing, the part that religion and culture plays, the double standards that often come into these sorts of issues, because we know that boys are abused as well, but overwhelmingly it's girls that are abused, and it's male perpetrators. So we go into some depth into that. In terms of the communities that I come from, if parents find out that, for example, their daughters or their sons have gone through child abuse or child sexual exploitation, there may be issues of forced marriage or honor-based violence, so we cover that. We look at the whole stuff around shame and stigma, the impact porn has. We look at it in terms of LGBTI. So I make sure that in any training delivery, there are always case studies around sexuality. Then on this side, so as you can see, one side's in purple and the other side is in blue. And the blue side is all the stuff that happens on the outside. So starting again from the top, when we looked at the definitions of child abuse and child sexual exploitation at the time, we didn't feel, as I said, this is coming from my survivor perspective, I felt there was unclarity between the two, yeah? The lack of appropriate agency responses, I mentioned earlier the invisibility of the experiences of the Pakistani girls, for example, the impact of the media. In terms of Rotherham and the UK, the far right has hijacked, for example, in terms of Muslim men being abusers. And the politicians, and again, we've had a number of politicians who have like used this issue. So when, and the reason why we cover some of that is that, for example, recently there was the high profile case of, he was called Lord Nazir, who has gone to prison for child abuse. And when, again, it was BBC Look North that wanted to, and did come into Rotherham when I spoke, when I reached out to different members of my community, a number of them just didn't want to speak out. And what they said to me is, the reason we don't want to speak out is because we're worried that the far right will then come and attack our women and sisters again, because there'll be negativity surrounding Rotherham. And so I suppose for me, when we try and talk about child abuse issues, people bring in these other related traumas that, yes, are traumas, but you have to work through those. Okay, next slide. Sorry, that's just, okay. These were, there's too many, I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll just read you a few. So I was mainly drawn to the course in the first instance as it discussed aiming to tackle these issues within the BME community from the perspective of BME workers. And I wanted to know how, as professionals working in diverse roles, how we can face, challenge and work through these issues, particularly when a large part of the target community are unwilling to discuss, recognise or made to be silenced out of fear, abuse, violence or some other form of control. Being able to openly discuss child sexual abuse and other difficult, sensitive topics, I think is the start, and I am keen to see what this course brings. Then I just put some examples, and this particular one in Rotherham, it's a majority Muslim community, and all of the workers that came on this course were from a Muslim background, and so some of this is geared in terms of them. Just some reflections from the journals that the students wrote. The second one here, I have also learned that within myself, I need to question my opinions. What are they based upon, and challenge my own views at times. However, I should also have confidence in the views I hold and use them to challenge those views that cause harm to our communities, especially BME women and girls. The next one says, we were asked to choose a card and talk about the subject on the card for 1 minute. Subjects discussed included LGBT, same-sex relationships and other so-called taboo subjects within the Muslim BME community. Then I'll not go through all of this. This was around the Theory U. Yeah, it says, reflecting back on the Theory U, my awareness has deepened around the issues covered on the course. I started with the voice of judgment about LGBT and Muslim communities, and now reflecting with fresh eyes. And then maybe I'll just, Anuja, how long have I got now?
You can take your time, because I'd rather you presented your work to its entirety.
So in terms of the course, we also covered like issues around prevent, because that again is part of our anti-racist work. And this quote said, although I have worked on ending violence against women and girls issues, including CSA and CSC, I was still shocked at how complex the issues are. I was unaware of the levels of spiritual abuse that takes place in a town like Rotherham, even, and that BME women, as always, have been at the forefront of challenging abuse, but that BME men have been trying to minimize the problem. I have been shocked also at how well funded the prevent strategy is. I was aware of the Islamophobia and how harmful practices such as FGM, etc., is being conflated with anti-extremism. But to see how invested the government is on funding and pursuing the racist Islamophobic narrative is still shocking. I am still quite surprised. I am quite surprised still at how much the idea of sex intimacy being seen as a sin in BME communities and how this feeds into creating a culture of silence and environment for abuse to thrive. I suppose the thing I'd like to say to the audience here, and it's the challenge that Amber have made, and you're totally right. If you look at some of this language, this needs changing, and it's, I suppose, with the George Floyd Black Lives Movement, Black people from across the UK started to question the use of the language around BME, because all of that is doing is lumping us together. And although there's benefit in us working together, because there are so many issues in terms of racism and other things that we face, we also have our individual specialisms, individual issues of the community. And so we need to have that time and space to work through our own issues. This one was, again, something that's been covered today about where we learn about sex. Do we have the language? Ask the group to come up with, and for me, what I suppose it was shocking in a way, because as I said, if you looked at the level of professionalism on the one hand that these women had, yet they didn't have the language to name sexual parts of the body or sexual abuse within their own language, and yet within their organizations, often other white professionals would expect them to deal with somebody if that person was from their own community. So it's really unfair about how policies, procedures, and the systems put lots of added pressure on people who are within those communities without the appropriate training and support. That's that. Yeah, again. Just these two, it is everyone's responsibility to have the conversations, even being from within the BME community. Finding the language and the right words to use was difficult, as this is an area which is taboo and never addressed. And then this course has enabled me to widen my perspective and build my existing knowledge around issues relating to CSE in the community. The activities and discussions that took place within training helped me to open up to new ideas and possibilities and recognize issues that I was not previously aware of. We haven't, I think, that as I said, I'm not going to I'll just let you have a quick read of those. I'll not go through them. And just this final one, thinking about the course context, I find it very intensive, sensitive, and informative. It was the first time that I have openly discussed sensitive issues like pornography, homosexual, transgender, Islamophobia, etc., with women professionals. I found very confident and comfortable of discussing and even express my criticism. We were able to accept that CSE happens in our own community and that we hide from various reasons. So we ran the course twice, and what I would like to see and happen is that something like this, that is a framework in a way, is taken out to all the different parts of our countries. And we ran it as a train the trainer. So the idea was that we trained a group of people. This was aimed at professionals, and that they then could internally deliver to their own communities. Ideally for me, we wanted to have a similar course, which is for white professionals, to get them to understand that when we're talking about child sexual abuse, it's not just about these are the signs to look for the signs and it's sorted, because that doesn't work within our communities. And also a third element, which was a very sort of simplified version of this, to take out into our communities so we can do it as awareness raising. So that's my input ending there.